or translate to having funding to do so. And lastly, the biggest threat to Paralympic classification is recognized by a second Colombian participant who reflects on the deceiving behaviors of misrepresenting skills or abilities to gain advantage and be favored with a lower sport class. Now, I want to jump to understanding the geographical distinctions because I have participants from the Global South and also from Europe mostly. So understanding these geographical nuances allow us to evaluate parasports development. For example, rehabilitation can be something that is a basic right in certain part of the world, but it's going to be a privilege if you look at the Global South. And Argentinian expert reflects that if a social and cultural shift comes into place, it will be reflected within parasport, hence classification as well. A proper support system, knowledge, and specialized workforce will impact athletes' career success. Their careers might be directly influenced and determined on a higher scale about their entourage and the support that they receive by their community, their society, the government, the National Paralympic Committee, and of course, anyone around or surrounding them. And when it comes to science-based approach, these perceptions and concerns are reflected in the way that para-athletes identify the gaps with the paraswimming classification code and invite the International Federation to evolve a further understanding of underlying medical conditions that are not fully considered on the specific tests and assessments that are currently being used for evaluations. Measuring limitations of performance across different eligible impairment types is required to keep a continuous improvement of the evaluation tables in this classification manual. And certain areas of improvement specifically set by para-athletes is that initially they want to have an objective justification for the wider community, but foremost to them, where clearly defined guidelines can be provided if a specific impairment profile is reallocated. This will ensure regaining trust in the process. Then, increasing the classification personnel and evaluation opportunities to avoid subjectivity and misses on the evaluations due to a lack of capacity, which will reduce misclassifications. And in my research, I proposed the application of the fairness, equality of opportunity principle. If anyone is interested in this one because it has some philosophical and fundamental aspects of, for example, how to go and lean down to moral foundations, I'll be more than glad to have a talk with you at the end. But what I'm saying here is basically that having a backbone based on an ethical approach is fundamentally necessary, and you can see education and accessibility as part of a national normative that we need to promote. And then we just move to the international stage where we're going to have the applications and the standards that are promoted by the International Federation. So I have these recommendations. Initially, I want to propose this based on my theoretical framework and certain aspects of the fairness model. The further development of these measurements through peer collaboration by relying on experts from academia and the paraswimming community. Classification protocols enhancement, these should be extended beyond assessment in competition to encourage a preventive measure when ethical concerns arise. It promotes fairness through continuous regulation. In addition, the inclusion of technology for proper assessment and predictability, such as underwater cameras, AI models, and data performance analytics can be explored. Oversights of National Paralympic Committee's classification systems. While protocols are standardized, there's little control over the operations of national classification frameworks. Ensuring the mitigation of systemic failures and promoting a level playing field must be a priority when it comes to classification opportunities, the classification outcomes, and legalization of sport classes in a national setting. Community engagement through education in the media to reach a degree of acceptance of the competition formats and diversity of impairments. And lastly, exploring a multi-reward system based on impairment profiles between sport classes. And this can be done by weighting a calculation of relevant parameters. Because at the end, you want to promote as well and recognize competitively specific impairment types that have not been historically on the podium. And I want just to leave you with a last reflection, because this has been an ongoing dilemma for the last 30 years in parasport classification. There's no perfect system, but the world evolves, and we should strive to move along with it. Working in synergy with all stakeholders within the parasport community and with a para-athlete-centered approach, will promote structural changes in how the system operates, placing at the forefront the voices of those directly impacted by the system, and who envision a fairer system to look at. Thank you.
Please stay. And can I have all the other panelists up here? I think the Paralympics and the para-classifications is like one of those, it's like a bumblebee that flies because it doesn't know it can't do it. It's so difficult to make these classifications, but we're doing it anyway, also because inclusion is important. It's important to actually give access to these athletes to compete, and I love that you keep trying to improve the system as well. Well, as I promised, I will open up for questions, comments, and even if you guys have questions for each other. Let's hear it. Yes?
Hi.
I think we can get
It's okay, I just talk about
this. Tell us who you are and your question.
I'm Jonas, and right now I'm a PhD student and part of the, not the MACI, but the DAISY program. Before I started as a PhD student, I worked for several years with the Danish Paralympic Committee during high performance, so I had the pleasure of being in Tokyo and in Paris. So I think Paralympic sport, sort of the paradox you mentioned in the beginning, is quite obvious here. You make competitive sport, but with an inclusive purpose.
Yeah.
So my thought is not so much necessarily for Henry, but the importance of the concepts we're using, because also in the Danish context we tend to say disability sport equals parasport, and parasport is really defined by the classification system, so you need to be classified into parasport. So I think the deaf case is quite interesting here. Is it a failure of the institution? They just say disability sport equal parasports without really knowing what that actually means, because that would rule out deaf sport. So maybe a fault for Maria, but also I think it could apply for some of the other cases where we tend to prioritize funding also for Olympic sport. I usually fund it more than non-Olympic sports, so the same might be true here, and if we do not address that, we might not get through with some of these things.
Yeah. Thoughts from the panel?
I can start with that one. And basically, it's really crucial to understand about the concept and the difference about disability sports and parasport, because when we see it from the Paralympic side, even though that is within their mission to try to encourage and also promote inclusivity through sports, it's not occurring because we have so many organizations and movements. We have a Special Olympics, we have Deaf Olympics, and we have some others around there that practically they have their own mission, and we're kind of segregated. We're not being inclusive enough within the disabled community to allow those spaces and to have fairness or equal opportunities to develop sports. So this should be a mission that might or need to come directly from level of the state, but at the same time, when we see accessibility of sports for disabled people, we might think that we are facing something that is really endemic, because you mentioned this is an African issue, but also it's a Latin American issue. We don't have probably a way to determine how many people is disabled within the context of the Latin American region, and the same, it might appear on the African context. So if we need to see this from a health perspective kind of issue, where of course we need to empower and to encourage the nations and the states to try to give those spaces. And okay, you were born with a disability or you acquire an impairment because something happened to you, then we are giving you that space and that framework for you to integrate within society, but not to have you just on the side. And I think that should be approach that organization should do, but I don't see synergy between all the movements that are working on people, on sports for disabilities.
And just to complement, you also mentioned, and I think it's very important to do this distinction between parasport and disability sports. And when you mentioned the deaf case, I feel that the Deaf Olympics and the deaf sports does not feel in fit in any of them, because for most of deaf people, they don't see themselves as disabled persons. As I mentioned in my presentation, they see themselves as a minority group, so it's also difficult to place them in this context.
Just to quickly add, can I just quickly add? Like they already said, like para-sport or Paralympics have been seeing, research have shown that it's not really an inclusive space. And also, I think one key point here, coming from the Sport for All perspective, is the terminologies that are being used. I think that's why a lot of organizations are advocating and say, instead of saying para-sport or saying this, probably use terms like people with disabilities, because it's opened the gates more and can cover more, or umbrella term for more people. Yeah.
And just to add an additional comment about who doesn't know what it means para sport, where it comes to para, it's because it's parallel to the Olympics. It doesn't mean paraplegic, which you go to certain communities and they might feel, oh, para sport is because you are you paraplegic? And no, that's why understanding the concept is pretty crucial.
Nice. Yes. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, hi, my name is Sharon Mizaki. My question is, in 2025, why does this disability still mean invisibility in mainstream sports?
Okay, I can take that. Okay, so like I said earlier on, and my co-panelist here said, I think that we need to really work on policies. We really can't do much without that. Why are they invisible? They are humans. They are sports people, like the able bodies. So why would they be invisible? We need to ensure that the existing policies are reviewed. We ensure that we get the necessary, the relevant stakeholders together to ensure that the right things are done by persons with disabilities. And also, policy, because without policy, we really can't do much. We can be here to talk from here till next year without anything. So when we have the right policies in place for the persons with disabilities, then we'll now look for a way to make it sustainable and also implement the policies, in my opinion. I think my other panelists too might want to add to that.
Yeah, I can add to that, because during the interviews I conduct, one of the interviewees said something that I think is really strong. He was a deaf participant, and he said, nothing about us without us. So we need to include people in the policy making. We cannot only create policy without considering them, without putting them in the table to also decide about it.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm Ross. I'm from the Australian Sporting Alliance for People with Disability. I also sit on the IPC Board of Appeals of Classification, so one of the only authors of the decision, the only published decision on intentional misrepresentation. So I wanted to ask Henry whether your research has looked at the new classification code, because it's just changed at the beginning of the year. But generally, a lot of the focus was on physical disability, aside from deaf, which is a sensory disability. And so I was wondering what's happening in different countries in relation to, say, intellectual cognitive impairments, where the only athletes that have truly been excluded from the Paralympics for intentional misrepresentation were not actually penalised, because they were penalised even though it wasn't people with the disability that actually engaged in intentional misrepresentation.
That's a good point.
That's a good one.
All right, thank you for your question. And to start, yes, this is based on the previous versions of the classification code. I didn't include the current code because it was just released on January, and at the same time, I already had framed how it's going to be. So it was going to be like, yeah, exactly. It was going to be like a lot of more work. And at the same time, it was a suggestion of my supervisor, which was part of the medical committee back in the days. Now he's an emeritus, Yves van der something from Belgium. And I would say that I look at the new ethical code. I see things that are changing. Like now you have, for example, a way to consult initially before you get into a competition, because that has been one of the major challenges when it comes to classification. When you don't have a robust system at the national level, and you just have certain people that you might just reach out and say, you have been a coach, can you tell us in which sport class this person can be? And they will be just like out of nowhere tell something to you based on their experience, but they don't have the right training or knowledge to decide. So when you go to competitions and then you just figure it out, you're not eligible. And you made all that investment just to go back, and then what is going to happen? We're not going to keep investing in para sport because basically we're not heading nowhere.
Yeah.
And I see this change in the new classification code, which I appreciate, but yeah, I base mostly my findings on the 3 previous versions because even though the para athletes that I interviewed, they didn't know about the new classification code. And when I'm focusing more on physical impairments is because based on my experience as a World Para Swimming referee, what I have seen on the stage or when I'm on the pool deck is the differences between impairments when you have a specific competition. And I was more curious to go into that based on my own perception instead of like just jumping, for example, on some other aspects of certain or different impairment types, like intellectual ones, where I don't have too much expertise about it. But I know that there are right now a specific effort for certain academics and also institutions to involve this development. For example, why not including Down syndrome into the Paralympics? So that's a good question to ask.
And I would like to add to that. So when you talk about non-physical disabilities, what do you mean by that? Do you mean the mental related non-physical? You know, we have deaf and people with visual impairment.
So yeah.
So are you talking about the mental part?
When we talk about non-physical, so if you take a medical model of disability as opposed to a social construct of disability, then visual impairment, hearing impairment, intellectual impairment, cognitive impairment are considered non-physical impairments. A mental health issue is not generally considered a intellectual or cognitive impairment. So that's what I mean by basically a non-physical impairment.
Okay, so because I'm looking at the fact that how many sports do we have for we know about the sports like official recognized by IOC and the Paralympics bodies. We know about the maybe deaf sports, we know visual implied sports and all that. There's blind football, of course, I know that. So cognitive development, do we have official or recognized games for these ones?
Yes.
So this is another discussion that we need to look at. How popular are they? How supportive have they been? Which tournaments have they appeared in and all that? So this is another discussion which I'm personally interested in, and maybe I'll meet you after this. Can we look at how to expand that? How do we take this discussion further on it? So thank you for that observation. So my other panelist?
Yes.
Mike?
Sorry, we're going to move on.
Oh, okay.
David McGilvery. My question is about the relationship between sport and wider societal issues in the countries that are being reflected here. So we talked a lot at the conference about the autonomy of sport. And in the context of this, we might say, how can we make improvements in disability sport, para-sport and the like? But in your countries, what's the context around about disability rights and the kind of, I guess, the model of disability that we're talking about there in terms of whether there is a move beyond medical model in some of the, maybe in particular in the Nigerian context that you were describing? Because it feels like resources, leadership, visibility, media coverage, these things are not about just sport. These are about how disability rights are perceived in the nations that you are. I'm in the UK, we've got big participation in parasport, but in terms of disability rights, I mean, we've rolled back on a number of those in the country, so there's a real challenge there in really progressing. So I just wanted to know that context.
Yes, I can start. So when you talk about disability rights, I think we're still far behind. So when you talk about that, you still see that there's a lot of gap in representation. Firstly, we still lack the systemic data. So there's actually no data where you can say this is the percentage of people that have disabilities in Nigeria first. So unfortunately, we still have that lacking. We're still way far behind when it comes to disability rights. I think one time we had a lot of protests around this, but nothing changed. So unfortunately, we're still like way behind in that.
In addition to that, from Nigerian context. So, like she said, that I know of some disabled rights organizations and all that, but we need, like I still said, the right stakeholders. She said the same thing the other time. Stakeholders, the right people that are passionate about this. And look at this room. we don't really have them represented here. We need to even go out and recognize and encourage them. A platform like Play the Game, we should, and there's a whole session and panel for persons with disabilities, and look at the panelists. What about them? So they need to even get encouraged to come out, to speak, to tell their stories as well. Look at this room. I can't see a single wheelchair here as well. So where do we go from here? When we are talking for them, they are not even here to tell us their problems, their issues. So it's the stakeholders, people, the decision makers need to also do more. Us, sports people, need to go out and encourage them to come out and tell their stories. You can't see someone sitting on a wheelchair and talking about disabilities, right? People will listen. They will take you seriously and want to work with you. Our room here, nobody's here. So, I mean, I don't know what to say. So please go ahead.
Yes. Well, my specialty is not in the field of disability, but just thinking about the question you asked and the context of it. I know that in Trinidad we do have a Paralympic team, but when reflecting a bit, they're more like hidden. And you don't get much information coming out. You only hear, so following up on your point, there need to be a little more
vocal
awareness of their participation and the opportunities that are available to them.
And just to something in addition, and going back to the concepts, we have ableism, we have otherness, and we have internal ableism. And that's something that is really rooted within society when you just disregard the needs of disabled people. So what happens when you go just and see yourself at the mirror and you say, the whole time I've been told that I cannot go on the streets on this condition, and I'm just going to keep here eating at home. So we need to go to society to make a change. And we need to start with education and from grassroots levels to make this a topic of the agenda of the educational programs, starting from elementary school and creating materials that gets to teach you for people to understand and see people with disabilities as they are, people.
Yeah, I just want to add also that I teach physical education, and I have had students with disability doing phys ed to be examined in a practical context. And we had to write to the examination board, Caribbean Examination Council, to let them know that we have this student who is challenged and we need a special exam for him, and they were accommodating. So that's one positive move, but the schools itself, we don't get the facilities. I'll give you an example. Our science lab is in level 2, and we were promised either an elevator or a ramp. The child went through 5 years and we never got it. So we have to move the class downstairs. So that awareness is very important. Yeah.
If I can just include the deaf in this context.
Thank you.
Because we are talking about disability, and most of the time we are talking about visible disability. And deaf, it's a invisible disability. We might have someone here that is deaf and we don't know. And when we are talking about Belgium, for example, the medical model is very strong, and that's the problem for deaf people, because they are not seen as disabled people, so they are not included in the para sports, in the disability organization, but they don't feel belonging in the hearing environment. So they are like in a lack, in the middle of nowhere,
I have a question over here. Thank you. My name is Elena. I'm from France. I'm glad to see that this panel is very diverse and with many representatives from the Global South. And I was really surprised when reading the program that there was only one panel. I know you did not make the program, but only one panel focusing on persons with disabilities. And that most of you are from the Global South, so it's my first Play the Game conference. Maybe this topic has been extensively discussed in the previous conferences, but do you think, so what does that tell us about the conversation around disability in sport? Is it because the Global North thinks they've resolved this issue, or what are your thoughts on that?
Global South.
I've been reflecting about it a lot, because when you're talking about disability, we are still very behind. They are talking about other problems that we didn't reach that point yet. We're still fighting for inclusion, for funding, for a lot of things. So I feel that when we're here talking about disability sports, we are way behind. So there is so many things happening in sports that you need to stop, go back like from the beginning. So I feel that that's how disability is like very behind, while there is so many things going on. But it doesn't mean that we should be only one panel. I agree with you, but it's small steps we can grow.
And to add to that, we have different realities. And let's start from that, because when I saw the key speakers of the VISTA conference that is going to happen in Egypt in December, we have people that is going to talk about technology improvements for wheelchairs, when probably in Nicaragua I'm seeing people that they are with improvised projects on the streets.
Yeah.
So of course, we have to go back and check what do we have right now and what's the reality of our own population to just start planning from there. Even though that we look at Europe as, of course, an example for development, still we need to fight for resources, as Maria said, and it's a long road, and not many people probably is going to try to be taking that risk or challenge to speak up for people that they're just cannot speak up by themselves because they're not being able to have a platform to do so.
And just to quickly add, I think, like you just said, the different realities. I think you have to understand in some country, using Nigeria as an example, a case study, is that some changes you want to make has to start from the community level. And disability, an example of that, is you have to start at community level because they are still shunned, in the sense that if a family has a child with a disability, the child is hidden away. You probably may see 3 of that kids and you will never know that they have a child with any kind of disability at all. So this is still something that goes deep down into the family context, cultural context, and communities. So it means that if you want to engage as such a society, you have to see how to do that from the ground, see how to have conversations around this, enlighten people, and get more people talking about it.
To just add to it, I have a kid brother who is autistic, and my mom is so proud to go everywhere with her last child. Like, he's like a pet, go everywhere with him. And our friends, I know I've said to her that, why are you going out with, like, when he comes to visit me and we go everywhere, so we grew up together. This is my brother, he's autistic, it is not a crime, he did not choose it, and he's doing well, he's doing fine. And my mom always said to me that our friends, even my parents, my dad would say, this boy, he should go stay in the house. Why is he here? And I'm so happy that I have a family that supports my brother. So I can talk to you from my own experience that a lot of parents still don't get it in Nigeria, in Africa. They still hide their children with disabilities. And I can tell you, even the elite that I know, that the so-called big people, rich people, they have persons with disabilities and they just get a small room and just confine the child to the place. Now imagine people with such mentality. How will they support the sport? So we need to encourage persons with disabilities to come out and talk. They should tell their stories. We are here, we are real, we are doing well, we can make your country proud and all of that. So I think that, like you said, we should find a way to educate them, go back to the grassroots, educate them, empower them, encourage them. They do not need our pity, they need our support. So we need to encourage them and not pity them at all, but support them. Thank you.
That's a good final comment, and I think I read a study that showed that after the 2012 Paralympics was the first really big sort of spectator success in London, and it permanently actually changed people's perception of disabled people in the general population. So sport actually has the power to shift our perceptions of disabled people towards somebody who is able, somebody who can do something, somebody who can be elite athletes. And I have to add, I used to train at the Australian Institute of Sport, and there the elite para-athletes are training side by side with the able-bodied elite athletes. I've run intervals with a girl in a wheelchair. She was kicking my ass. So it's like, I think this is also a good argument for why we actually really need to keep pushing this agenda and pushing for disabled people in sport, because they can actually shift that narrative and take the shame away from being disabled. So I think that is one of the places where we really have a potential to make a difference. And I just want to thank this amazing panel for coming with your insights, your research, your knowledge, sharing it with us. And have a great rest of the game.
Thank you. Hello. Good job.
No, you enjoyed the presentation.
Good job. Good job. Good job.
Well done, guys.
Thank you so much.
How about you? Good job.
That was great.
There's a small gift from playing the game.
And
for
good
you.
job too.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's fine. Okay.